going to learn how to make a liquid simulation in Blender. We're going to talk about setting it up and how it works. Do keep in mind that liquid simulations are a very slow and boring process, but sometimes we need them. So without further ado, let's get started.
Alright guys, so we are going to make a liquid simulation today, and right now I am going into this file, save as, and create a new file for us to work in. First of all, unlock everything because I want to delete the keyframes on my camera. And by the way, you can hop into any render that we've done. It doesn't matter which render you pick, as long as you've got the bottle that you want the liquid simulation to happen on. For me, that will be the black bottle. So right now I'm going to select all of this and delete it. Now, one thing that I said at the beginning of this masterclass is the dimensions should be at the proper scale because our depth of field will be more accurate, etc. But right now for the liquid simulation, we actually do not want it to be on the proper scale. Reason for it, liquid simulations have a very hard time calculating what they should do when the object is too small. We are going to scale this up as 10 first, and now it's 1.5 meters, so as 8 or no, as 7. So now it's 10 meters, and I think this is the accurate way that we can make a liquid simulation. Right now I'm going to scale up our backdrop as well, and maybe press on 3. Place our camera by holding Ctrl, Alt and pressing 0. Bringing this down to the bottom of our can. I'm going to scale it on the Y-axis and scale it some more. So on the X-axis as well, and maybe on the Z-axis. Of course, our lighting will not be proportional anymore because lighting has something to do with the distance and the strength. So for very large objects, low wattage, a low watt strength is not capable of giving us enough light, as you can see right here. So doesn't matter for now because I am going to delete all the area lamps we have, and now it's gone. Now I'm using an add-on called Easy HDRI. What you can do is you can go over to this World tab, you can click on the color, go to Environment Texture, and there you can add in your HDRI. But I'm going to use this free add-on. Going into my downloads folder, which is where I keep all my EXR files, fix world nodes, and right now we have some lighting to work with. It's very strong, so I'm going to change it to this one, and now it looks good. On to the liquid simulation. So that was pretty much the entire intro. We've got everything set up. This doesn't have any keyframes or whatever. We have our white backplate and our can, and everything is looking fine and dandy. So liquid simulations. There are a couple of things you need to know. So first of all, liquid simulation has to take place into a domain, which is what I'm going to make right now. But first, let's make sure that our bottle is actually at the bottom of our plane. So right now it's aligned perfectly. I can go over here, select this edge, shift cursor to selected, and now I'm going to bring our cube down. Oh, where's our cube? There it is. And right now I'm going to bring this down and make sure that it's on the plane as well. Now I'm going to set the pivot point to 3D cursor, like so, and scale this up. Now go into the camera and make sure that it is covering the entirety of our scene. And this also includes the back plane. And because we have perspective in our camera, it is not an orthogonal camera, we can see the back lines. So you must make sure that you can also not see these back lines in the camera view. The way we can do that is by going over here and changing our viewport display to wire. Going into modeling mode, and as you can see, we have the wire. I actually placed it quite perfectly on this edge, but not on this edge. So I'm going to scale it some more on the Y-axis, and now everything is within our scene. Scale it a little bit more on the X-axis. So this is what we want to have for our setup. This is going to be our domain. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up just some more because I need some space on the back here, because that's where we are going to be projecting our fluid simulation from. Now there are a couple of ways to do this, and I'm going through them one by one because I do not want this to be a tutorial like, oh, just click on this and click on that. I want to actually show you guys how the liquid simulation actually functions and how we can make sure that in each and other render that we are going to do in the future, that it looks good. First of all, the domain. I'm going into this tab right here, which is the physics tab, and I'm going to click on fluid. The type should be a domain, and automatically it's set to gas. It always does that, so change it to liquid. Now we cannot see anything anymore, and for that reason we need to go into the visibility again, and under the viewport display it's set to solid, and I'm going to change it to bounce. Now the first thing that you want to know, this is a little cube right here in the corner, and it determines the resolution of our liquid sim. So let me explain. 64, and it will make the cube smaller. So this is basically like a ratio to how many cubes will fit into this scene. And the more little cubes you have, the more calculations it will do and the more precise your liquid simulation will be. So that's what the little cube is for, just in case you're wondering. So here we have our can. We're not going to do anything with it right now. I'm simply going to add a plane. I think planes are the easiest way to do this. And we can change our pivot point back to median point. And I feel like I'm a bit hunched over, so I'm scoofing up like so, and I want to have correct posture for you guys so you do not get into these bad habits. Right now we are hiding our plane behind our can. I want to give this a fluid simulation and set it to flow. And I'm going to set the smoke type to liquid, the flow type to liquid. So flow behavior is from geometry, which means that it will be projected from this geometry. Now, this doesn't have any geometry as of yet, because it is a plane. It does not have any actual depth in the scene. So what are we going to do? The flow source is the mesh. I'm actually just going to show you. So let's select our domain. Let's go over here, right here in the properties tab. I'm going to set it to 32, just for demonstration purposes. Now, one thing that we want to have in our liquid simulation is very simple. We want to set this to modular, and click is resumable. Now the reason for that is that when you press on replay, you can kind of play around like this and it will try to give you the liquid simulation in real time. Then it will be baked in the cache automatically. It can kind of freeze up your computer. I do not like this way of working. By the way, if you do like this way of working, you can do that. But each time that you make a change, you have to change the resolution division to 33 or just one higher and then 32 back again. And then it will reset the cache. But in this tutorial, we are going to use modular, which means that we can add to it and bake different parts of the liquid simulation at separate times. We can stop it and resume it because it is resumable. That's why we clicked this little button right here. This start and end frame is how long the simulation will take place. I'm going to set this to, let's say, 200 frames. 200 frames is pretty long. It's 10 seconds. And I definitely do not want it to be 10 seconds, but sometimes it needs some time to start. We are just going to cut it out in the editing part of this masterclass. So I'm going to set this cache to 200, and I will show you right now by going over here. We can bake data. So I'm just going to bake the data, and what does it do? Well, nothing. Exactly as I predicted, because this does not have any geometry really. From a plane, nothing is emitted simply because we added it to a liquid simulation. The flow source is a mesh. This is okay. The surface emission will actually show you how much water will be coming from our geometry. So let's say we add a surface emission of 10. I'm just going to add 10. I'm going into this plane and we can add initial velocity. So we've actually given it something to work with, namely the surface emission. This makes sure that there is something emitted from our surface, which is the plane. And the initial velocity will determine where things will be going. So what I'm going to do in order to make this more visible is I'm going to decrease the gravity, because the gravity makes sure that everything falls down. So I'm heading over into the baked data once again, and I will show you what happens. So as you can see, it is slowly emitting it towards this place. And it's very slow, and we can increase that speed by a whole lot. So normal to 100, and let's bake it again. All right, so as you can see now, the normal makes sure that it is emitted from our plane, and it shoots it towards that side. One thing that you should know, it is emitting it from the vertices and not necessarily from the middle of the plane, just so you know. And now if we were to bake this into a mesh, let's just do that real quick. You will be able to see that if we change this back to a solid, it has turned the particle system into a fluid. And this is exactly what we want. Now, of course, it's going through our can, which is not what we want. But with these basics, we kind of understand what we need to do. We have our plane, and we can use any object we like, by the way. But we have our plane, and it emits particles from it. And these particles can be turned into a mesh, which is our fluid. and this fluid needs to interact with our can. Now, how are we going to do that? We have our can right over here, and we can press on this can, add a fluid simulation, type a factor, because this means that it will interact with the liquid that we've added. You can pretty much set everything to default. It doesn't really matter that much. It does a pretty good job while doing nothing. So let's keep it like that and rebake it so I can show you what it does. Rebake it, bake data. So right now, what does it look like? Change it to solid. And it's interacting with our can. So it's not going through the can anymore. It is kind of bouncing out against it, which is why it creates this cool splash. And that is exactly what we want. Now, this is not the type of splash that we want it to look like. I'm going to change it back to bounce. I'm going to delete all the bakes. Don't play around with this too much, because if you use 64, it will not look like the one that you do in higher resolution. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to change this to 128 just for example, because it's so slow and sometimes it takes a long time to reach the can for some reason. Yeah, the way this works actually is because of this little cube right here. So it was a lot faster when we had big blobs, but we also got some big blobs in our mesh eventually, which doesn't look too good if you ask me. But now that it's a smaller cube that is calculating, it doesn't reach our can as quickly, and you will actually find that there's a lot less water when we are working with this in a higher resolution division. So this particle system is heading towards our can. Doesn't seem like it had any hurry in doing so. We're going to free this data to the source is actually the movement of the can when you kind of move it yourself like this. And then you have the animation going and the source will make it go like that. So we do not need the source, but the normal can only go to 100 and no more. So that is a problem. I'm heading over to the plane and first of all, I'm placing it closer to this can. And now I can see it's moving on the x-axis. I'm going to move it on the x-axis and give it an initial velocity of around 40 meters per second. Then I'm selecting my domain, bake the data. And now I hope this will speed up our particle system and make sure it hits our can. Now one warning about liquid simulations, because I need to be honest about this. This is not something that you can just do, oh, let me do a nice liquid simulation today. Ho, ho, ho. No, this is something that will cost a lot of time. You have to do a lot of reiterations. You have to change settings all the time. And then you're waiting for a bake and all those annoying things. I do not like working with liquid simulations, to be honest, because it's too slow for my liking. I like to work fast, I like to have things done quickly, but I do love the result that it gives us, and so it is a necessary evil. That looks pretty cool. Takes a while. It takes a long while. I am going to change this once again, free the data. I'm going to place this even more downward because I want some more water over there. And I'm going to increase the speed to 100 meters per second, so it will be even faster. And then I will take, what is it? Oh yeah, the same plane and bring it upwards. And also, let's change this to around 70 meters per second. And now we can bake it once again. Yeah, that looks cool. Ooh, I think our particle radius should be something like 1.1. And then I'm going to bake the mesh. Plato, of course, was the philosopher of the forms. And the forms were invisible but structuring the universe. There is something about those trees that we can call tree-iness. All these other trees that we have here in the actual world are mere instances of these forms from the perfect form. So we have the perfect form and it's going down and you have an oak and you have all these different types of tree. Oh, my bake is done. So let's go right over here and look what it has given us. Actually, I do not want it, and I want you guys to be taught properly how to set this up. So I'm going to delete my bake, even though it cost a lot of time and a lot of headaches. I'm going to free the data. So right now, what I want to do is go over here to border collisions, and I'm going to turn all of this off. Now, what border collisions does is that it is showing us these bounds and these walls right over here. And when the liquid hits these walls, it actually has some sort of physical property acting upon it, which means that if our liquid hit the wall, it will bounce back. And this can be ruining your render because it might fill up your entire cube with water. This is something that we've often seen. Or it bounces off and it becomes quite unnatural because in the scene there was nothing there to bounce off of. So it seems really weird. And that's why I'm turning off the border collisions, because we do not need the water to interact with either the floor or the wall or the ceiling. So that's why I'm doing that. Let's look at our particle system. Oh, it looks so cool. I'm going to set the particle minimum a lot higher. I'm going to set it to 16. I'm going to set the particle maximum to 32. When you do this on resolution 128, this will not deliver the most beautiful results, but when you are doing your final bake, this will deliver the most beautiful results. And what it's taking care of is that it's making bigger particles which will clump towards each other, so you don't have all these gaps and edges which kind of fiddle around sometimes. So you don't want that. And the narrow bandwidth, that will make sure that it's stickier in a certain type of sense. Not like viscosity, but it will make sure that these particles adhere to each other a little bit more, so you don't get all these wonky details flickering around in your render, which will really make your liquid simulation look bad. So I like using these settings. I'm just going to set this to 9, the minimum to 16, particles maximum to 32. What you can also do is, if you think the render is going too fast, I don't think this is the case in my render, but you can change the time scale, and this will adjust the simulation speed, as it says when you hover your mouse over. You can set it to half the speed and it will slow down and make it look a bit more slow motion. But if you actually want to make it slow motion, you also have to go over here, change the frame rate to, let's say, 60 or 120 FPS, which means that in 120 frames, 1 second will have passed. So it's frames per second, and how many frames can you fit in that second? In DaVinci Resolve, I usually work with a 24 FPS or 30 FPS, usually 24 FPS timeline, which means that if we have a 120 FPS render, it will be 5 times slower. It is a second of the simulation, but it is actually 5 seconds. It's just really slow. I'm going to set this to 60 FPS, and this means that we can slow it down by 2.5 times. So if you leave it on 24 FPS and you want to speed ramp it in your editing program, doesn't look good, don't try it. There's a lot of flickering in between. Why? Well, if you have 24 frames in your second and you stretch it out to 5 seconds, now these 24 frames have to compose those 5 seconds, which means that you only have like 4.5 or 4.2 for each second. And that doesn't look good. All right, so that's why you need to do the 60 FPS or 120 FPS, just in case you wanted to know. And now I'm doing the bake. All right, so this is what the fluid simulation now looks like. And if we set this to our render mode, you can actually see that it's still just a white blob. So we are going to the shader editor, and right over here, there's 2 options basically. We can either increase the transmission to 1, change the color to whatever we like, something like this. And you can play around with the IOR, so right over here. One other option is to go over here, glass BSDF, and plug that one in. And this also looks very good if you ask me. And change the color to whatever you like. And you can, once again, change the IOR. So whatever you think looks better, you can go for this one, or you can go for this one. I kind of like the glass version in this type, so maybe I'm just going for the glass material, change the color around, maybe I want it to be a little bit lighter. And this kind of gives us an impression of what the fluid actually looks like. So right now our liquid simulation is pretty much done. There's a couple of things I want to tell you. We want to add a new modifier, and it's going to be the smooth modifier. So if I turn this off, you can see that we have a lot of these edges, and you can pretty much see the polygons going around here. And I think the easiest way to get rid of those is to add a smooth modifier and repeat it as many times as possible. So this is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now it already looks a lot better. Then I'm going back into the physics properties. I'm going to leave everything of this as it is, but there is one setting under mesh, and it's called use speed vectors. I am going to click on that, and the reason for it is that it kind of already calculates the motion blur for the particle simulation. So I like to click this on. So first I'm going to bake this out, and then I will show you how to render this properly. Change the resolution division to 350. Because I'm feeling wild today. Alright, so this is the fluid simulation. It looks very smooth, very cool. I think this is beautiful for our final shot. In the render settings right over here, I'm going to scroll down, and under light paths, you can either change this to the max value in order to have the maximum amount of ray tracing possible for anything that we've added here. Let me just show you what it looks like. Full global illumination, and it's just a slight difference, but it can help. So check that out for your render for yourself. I'm just going to render this on default because I think it looks good. And right now under motion blur, I've got that ticked, of course. And right here we've got film, transparent glass. And the transparent glass will make sure that it is possible to place a different background behind this if you're rendering this out in, let's say, transparency either way. So yeah, now you can see it. This is normal. And then with transparent glass, we have this type of simulation, and you can place any background behind it that you want. I'm just going to render it out with my original plane because I think that is the aesthetic of the entire video, and I'm going to stick with it. Fast GI approximation, it interprets the way that the ray tracing works. So it's not really calculating every frame, but it is trying to make an interpretation of it. So fast GI approximation, and then we can increase the viewport bounces, because as you saw when I just turned it on, this piece right here became a lot darker. So take a look at that. And now we have some black areas right there. And that's because it is interpreting the calculation instead of actually doing it. Right here, if we increase the viewport bounces, you can see that dark part soon disappears. Now this is on 8, so the render bounces should also be on 8. And I think this looks beautiful. Render animation.
I've made 2 different liquid simulations and 3 different renders. Now I've only showed you how to make one of these, so I want you to make the other 2 yourself. On one of the renders I simply changed the camera angle, and on the other I used a curved path as we did before in this free masterclass. So you should be able to figure this out. So in total I made 3 liquid renders that we are going to use in the final editing tutorial. But you don't have to do that, and you can follow along just as well using one liquid render. But I do encourage, as a teacher, that you play around with this yourself and really solidify that knowledge that you've gained. If you like this content and feel like you'll benefit from being subscribed, then I highly recommend doing so. In the next part, we are going to make this reveal animation, and I'll see you in the next video.